Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it, and sometimes that chance comes in the form of a stubborn little girl who won't budge. Every parent knows that moment when a child's words can break your heart and heal it at the same time. Sheriff Ray Delaney thought his quiet days in Cedar Falls were behind him until he found a 7-year-old sitting outside the old saloon, refusing to go home. She'd been there since sunrise, arms crossed, looking like she was waiting for something important. When Ray knelt down and asked why she wouldn't leave, her answer stopped him cold. The child had her mother's eyes he hadn't seen in 20 years. Eyes that belonged to the woman he'd loved and lost. What she told him next would change everything he thought he knew about his past. But can a man who spent decades running from his mistakes find the courage to face the daughter he never knew existed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Falls' main street, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of amber and gold. Sheriff Ray Delaney had walked this same route for 37 years, his boots wearing familiar grooves in the wooden sidewalks that had seen better decades. At 58, Ray moved with the measured pace of a man who understood that rushing rarely solved anything worth solving. Cedar Falls wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. Nestled in a valley between rolling hills that turned purple, at sunset the town had grown old gracefully, like a comfortable chair that nobody wanted to replace. The population had held steady at just over 2,000 souls for the past 15 years, give or take a few births and departures. Most folks knew each other's business, and Ray knew all of it. The town square centered around a modest courthouse built in 1897, its brick facade mellowed by time and weather. Murphy's Saloon occupied the corner lot, its swinging doors long since replaced with a proper wooden door that Doc Henderson had insisted upon after too many winter drafts. The barbershop, general store, and Henderson's medical practice completed the essential services that kept Cedar Falls functioning as it always had. Ray's office sat across from the courthouse, a simple building with sheriff painted in fading. Black letters on the front window. Inside, 2 desks faced each other, his and Deputy Martinez's, surrounded by filing cabinets that held decades of mostly minor infractions and the occasional serious matter that reminded everyone why they needed a sheriff at all. This particular morning had started like any other. Ray arrived at 7:30, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and settled into his daily routine of reviewing the night's incident reports. Deputy Sophia Martinez wouldn't arrive until 8, giving Ray a precious hour of solitude to plan his day and think through any lingering cases. But the little girl outside Murphy's had changed everything. Ray had first noticed her around sunrise when he'd glanced out his office window while reaching for his coffee mug. A small figure sat cross-legged on the wooden walkway, her back pressed against the saloon's wall. At first glance, she looked like any child waiting for a parent, perhaps playing some game of imagination that youngsters favored. By 8 o'clock, she hadn't moved. By 9, Ray's concern began to override his assumption that someone would surely collect her soon. Cedar Falls wasn't a place where children went missing or sat unattended for hours. Parents here kept close watch on their own. When Ray finally approached her, kneeling on the dusty street to meet her at eye level, he'd expected a simple explanation. Lost, maybe. Confused about where her family had gone, perhaps waiting for grandparents who were running late. He hadn't expected to look into eyes that belonged to Grace Sullivan. 20 years had passed since Grace left Cedar Falls, but Ray would have recognized those eyes anywhere. Green as spring grass, with flecks of gold around the edges, eyes that had once looked at him with love so pure it made his chest ache to remember. Eyes that had filled with tears the last time he'd seen them, when Grace had packed her belongings and driven away from everything they'd built together. The memory hit him like a physical blow as he studied the child's face. The resemblance was unmistakable, not just the eyes, but the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when thinking, even the gentle curve of her cheekbones. This was Grace's daughter, no question about it. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ray had asked, his voice gentler than usual. "Emma," she'd replied, never breaking eye contact. "Emma Sullivan." Sullivan. Grace had kept her maiden name then. Ray filed that information away, along with the dozen questions suddenly crowding his mind. "And why won't you go home, Emma?" Her answer had nearly knocked him backward. "Because my mama said you'd come for us one day, and I think today is the day." Now, 2 hours later, Ray sat in his office with Emma perched on the chair across from his desk, her small legs swinging freely as she studied the wanted posters on his bulletin board. A faded pink backpack rested at her feet, bulging with whatever belongings a 7-year-old considered essential. Deputy Martinez had arrived to find her there, raising an eyebrow at Ray, but asking no questions. Sophia had worked with Ray for 8 years, and had learned to read his moods better than most. She could see this was something significant. "You hungry, mija?" Sophia asked Emma, using the Spanish endearment that came naturally to her. Emma nodded shyly, and Sophia headed for the small refrigerator in the corner where they kept sandwiches for long shifts. Ray watched this interaction while his mind raced through the implications of Emma's presence. Grace had a daughter. Grace had told that daughter about him. Grace had somehow prepared Emma for this moment, as if she'd known it would come. But where was Grace? The question sat heavy in Ray's chest as he studied Emma's face for more clues. The child seemed remarkably calm for someone who'd been sitting alone on the street since dawn. She'd accepted his invitation into the office without hesitation, as if she'd been expecting it. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes scuffed from regular play. She looked cared for, loved. But there was something in her eyes, a shadow, that suggested she'd seen more sorrow than any 7-year-old should carry. "Emma," Ray said carefully, "can you tell me where your mama is right now?" The shadow in her eyes deepened. "Mama's with the angels now," she said with the matter-of-fact tone children used when repeating something adults had told them. "She went to sleep and didn't wake up." Ray felt the air leave his lungs. Grace was dead. The knowledge hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Grace, vibrant, laughing Grace, who had once filled his world with light, was gone. The woman he'd loved more than his own life, the woman he'd lost through his own stubborn pride, would never again smile at him across a crowded room or challenge him to be better than he was. "I'm sorry for your loss, sweetheart," Ray managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "When did your mama go to the angels?" 3 months and 2 weeks ago, Emma replied, with the precision children sometimes showed for important dates. "Mrs. Henderson, not the doctor, the other Mrs. Henderson who lived next door, she took care of me after, but she got sick too, and now she's in the hospital place where sick people go." Ray's heart clenched. Grace's child had lost her mother and her caretaker, and somehow she'd made her way to Cedar Falls looking for him. How had she gotten here? How had she known where to find him? "Emma, how did you get to Cedar Falls?" She reached for her backpack, unzipping it with careful fingers. "Mama gave me this," she said, pulling out a manila envelope thick with papers. "She said if anything happened to her, I should bring it to Sheriff Ray Delaney in Cedar Falls. She said you were the best man she ever knew, and you'd take care of me." Ray accepted the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written across the front in Grace's familiar handwriting, loops and curves he'd seen on grocery lists and love notes decades ago. Inside the envelope, he could feel multiple documents, photographs, and what felt like letters, but he couldn't open it, not yet. Not with Emma watching him with those achingly familiar eyes. "How did you get here, sweetheart? It's a long way from... Where were you living?" "Millbrook," Emma said. "Mama was a teacher there. I took the bus like she taught me. She made me practice lots of times in case I ever needed to find you." Ray's throat tightened. Grace had prepared her daughter for this possibility, had taught her how to navigate the world to reach him if necessary. Even after 20 years apart, Grace had trusted him with the most precious thing in her life. The office door chimed as Doc Henderson stepped inside, his weathered face creased with concern. At 72, Doc had been Cedar Falls' physician for over 40 years and had delivered half the town's children, including several who now had children of their own. "Ray, I heard you found a little one who needed help," Doc said, then stopped, short when he saw Emma. His expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching shock. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, then caught himself. "Pardon my language, sweetheart." Emma giggled, the first genuine childish sound she'd made since Ray found her. "Doc, this is Emma Sullivan," Ray said carefully. "Emma, this is Doc Henderson. He's been taking care of folks in Cedar Falls since before I was born." Doc approached slowly, studying Emma's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Sullivan, you said? Would your mama happen to be Grace Sullivan?" Emma nodded eagerly. "Did you know my mama?" Doc's eyes found Ray's across the room, and in that glance, Ray saw understanding pass between them. Doc had been here 20 years ago. Doc had seen Grace leave. Doc knew what this meant. "I did know your mama," Doc said gently, settling into the chair beside Emma. "She was one of the kindest young women I ever met. She helped my wife with the church social suppers and always made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Emma's face lit up. "Mama still made the best apple pie. She taught me how to help." The correction broke Ray's heart all over again. Deputy Martinez returned with a sandwich and a glass of milk, setting them in front of Emma with maternal efficiency. "There you go, Misha. You eat up while these old men figure things out," Ray shot. Sophia, a grateful look. She was handling this with the same steady competence she brought to everything else, asking no questions, but providing exactly what was needed. Doc Henderson cleared his throat. "Ray, might I have a word with you outside?" They stepped onto the wooden walkway where Emma had spent her morning vigil. The late afternoon sun painted everything in golden hues, and Ray could hear the distant sound of children playing in the schoolyard 3 blocks over. "That child is Grace's daughter." "No mistake," Doc said without preamble. "Got her mama's eyes and that stubborn chin Grace used to get when she was determined about something." "I know," Ray replied heavily. "Grace is dead, Doc, 3 months ago." Doc's face fell. "Ah, hell, Ray. I'm sorry. Grace was good people." They stood in silence for a moment, watching through the window as Emma carefully ate her sandwich while Sophia showed her something in a law enforcement magazine. "What are you going to do?" Doc asked. Ray looked at the envelope in his hands, still unopened. "I don't know yet. Read what Grace left me, I suppose. Figure out what she wanted. You know." "What she wanted," Doc said quietly. "She wanted you to take care of her girl." The weight of that responsibility settled on Ray's shoulders like a lead blanket. He was 58 years old, set in his ways, accustomed to a life of routine and solitude. What did he know about raising a child, especially a girl who'd just lost everything familiar in her world? "I don't know how to be a father, Doc. Nobody does, until they are one," Doc replied. "But I remember how you were with Grace. I remember how much you loved her, how you'd have done anything for her. That child in there is part of Grace, Ray. She's what Grace left behind." Ray nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "Besides," Doc added with a slight smile, "seems to me Grace thought you could handle it, or she wouldn't have sent Emma to you." They returned to the office to find Emma and Sophia deep in conversation about the differences between sheriffs and police officers. Emma listened with the serious attention of someone genuinely interested in learning, asking thoughtful questions that showed intelligence beyond her years. "Sheriff Ray," Emma said when she saw him, "Deputy Sophia says you're the sheriff for the whole county. That's a lot of people to keep safe." "It is," Ray agreed, settling back into his chair. "But I have help from good people like Deputy Martinez." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mama said keeping people safe is the most important job anyone can have. She said that's what you do. You keep people safe so they can be happy." The simple statement hit Ray like a physical blow. Grace had spoken about him to their daughter, had told Emma about his work in terms that made it sound noble rather than routine. After 20 years, Grace had still believed in him. The afternoon stretched toward evening, and Ray knew he couldn't postpone the inevitable much longer. Emma needed a place to stay, proper care, and someone to help her navigate this new world she'd entered. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Grace had left for him in that envelope. "Emma, sweetheart," Ray said, "I need to read what? Your mama wrote to me. Would you be okay sitting with Deputy Martinez for a few minutes?" Emma nodded, then surprised him by sliding down from her chair and walking over to him. She stood beside his desk, her small hand resting on his arm. "Mama said you might be sad when you read her letters," Emma said quietly. "She said to tell you she's not mad anymore, and she hopes you're not mad either." Ray's vision blurred as he looked down at this remarkable child who carried her mother's wisdom in her 7-year-old heart. "I'm not mad, sweetheart," he managed. "I never was mad at your mama." Emma smiled, the first fully happy expression he'd seen from her. Good. That's what she hoped. With that, she returned to Sophia's side, leaving Ray alone with Grace's final words to him. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, weighted with 20 years of separation and regret. Whatever Grace had written, whatever she'd wanted him to know, it would change everything. Ray took a deep breath and carefully opened the seal, ready to hear from the woman he'd never stopped loving. Ray's hands shook slightly as he unfolded the first document from Grace's envelope. A death certificate, official and final, confirmed what Emma had told him with such heartbreaking simplicity. Grace Marie Sullivan, age 37, had died of complications from pneumonia 3 months and 18 days ago in Millbrook General Hospital. The clinical language couldn't capture what the world had lost when Grace drew her last breath. It couldn't describe the laughter that had filled rooms wherever she went, or the way she'd hum while cooking breakfast, or how she'd argue passionately about books she'd read, gesturing with her hands until Ray would catch them and kiss her palms to make her stop and focus on him instead. Beneath the death certificate lay a photograph that nearly undid him completely. Grace sat on a porch swing, older than when he'd last seen her, but still beautiful, in the way that had always taken his breath away. Her auburn hair showed threads of silver, and fine lines bracketed her eyes, but her smile remained exactly as he remembered, warm and genuine and somehow mischievous. Somehow. Beside her sat Emma, smaller in the photo, maybe 5 years old, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. On the back of the photograph, Grace's handwriting, Emma's 5th birthday. She insisted on having cake for breakfast. "I couldn't say no. She has your stubborn streak already. Taken in our backyard, Millbrook, 2 years ago." Ray studied the image, memorizing every detail. Grace looked happy in the photo, content in a way that eased some of the guilt he'd carried for 20 years. She'd built a good life for herself and Emma, even without him. The next document made his chest tighten, with something between hope and disbelief. Emergency contact information for Emma Sullivan, with his name listed first. Sheriff Ray Delaney, Cedar Falls County Sheriff's Department. Below that, in Grace's careful script, primary guardian in case of emergency. Father Ray set the paper down with trembling hands. Emma wasn't just Grace's daughter, she was his daughter too. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. All these years, Grace had been raising their child alone, and he'd never known. During Emma's first steps, her first words, her first day of school, Grace had been both mother and father to a little girl who carried half his DNA. Doc Henderson noticed Ray's sudden pallor from across the room. "You all right there, son?" Ray couldn't answer. His world had shifted on its axis twice in one day, first learning that Grace was dead, now discovering he had a daughter he'd never known existed. Emma continued chatting with Deputy Martinez, oblivious to the earthquake happening at his desk. The envelope contained more photographs. Emma as a baby, with Grace's tired but radiant face. Emma's first Christmas, sitting among wrapping paper with a gap-toothed grin. Emma starting kindergarten, her backpack nearly as big as she was, Grace kneeling beside her with obvious pride. Each image was a milestone Ray had missed, a memory that belonged to someone else's life. Grace had documented Emma's childhood meticulously, as if she'd always intended these photos to find their way to him eventually. The final item in the envelope was a letter, several pages long, written in Grace's familiar handwriting. Ray's name adorned the first page, followed by words that reached across 20 years of silence. My dearest Ray, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and Emma has found you as I taught her to do. I pray you're not too angry with me for keeping her from you all these years. I know it was wrong, but I was young and hurt and convinced I was protecting all of us from more pain. Do you remember our last fight? You'd just been offered that position with the state task force, the dangerous, on tracking down the drug dealers who'd been terrorizing 3 counties. It would have meant months away from home, long stretches where I wouldn't know if you were safe, and I was terrified of losing you to violence or to work that consumed everything you touched. I was also 8 weeks pregnant, though I didn't know it yet. When I left Cedar Falls that night, I thought I was saving us both from a life of worry and loneliness. I thought you'd chosen duty over love, and I was too proud and too scared to fight for what we had. I drove to my sister's house in Millbrook and convinced myself it was better this way. 6 weeks later, when I realized I was carrying your child, I picked up the phone to call you 100 times, but each time I hung up before dialing. What if you felt trapped? What if you resented a baby that tied you down when your career was just taking off? What if I'd been right, and your work would always come first? So I told myself I was being noble by staying away. I told myself Emma was better off with a mother who could focus entirely on her rather than parents who might resent each other's choices. Looking back, I can see how young and foolish I was, but at the time it felt like courage. I named her Emma Grace Sullivan because I wanted her to carry something beautiful from both of us, your strength and my hope. I told her about you from the time she could understand stories. I told her about the good man who kept people safe, who was brave and kind and always did what was right. I told her you were a hero, Ray, because that's what you always were to me. I followed your career from afar. I kept newspaper clippings of your commendations, your promotions, the times you were mentioned for helping people. I was so proud, Ray. You became everything I knew you could be, and I regretted every day that I wasn't there to celebrate with you. When I got sick last fall, when the doctors told me my time was limited, I finally found the courage I should have had 20 years ago. I started teaching Emma about Cedar Falls, about you, about what to do if she ever needed to find her father. I made her practice taking the bus route. I gave her money and instructions and all these documents. I know this isn't fair to you. I know it's selfish to burden you with a child you never knew existed just because I'm too scared to face eternity without knowing she'll be safe. But Emma is the best part of both of us, Ray. She's smart like you, stubborn like both of us, and kind in ways that remind me why I fell in love with you in the first place. She doesn't know you're her father yet. I thought that should come from you when you're ready. I told her you were Mama's best friend, the man who would always keep her safe if anything happened to me. I'm not asking you to forgive me, though I hope someday you might. I'm asking you to love our daughter the way I know you can. She's already lost so much. Don't let her lose the father she's never had the chance to know. All my love, always and forever, Grace P.S. She likes pancakes with chocolate chips, bedtime, stories about brave sheriffs, and she's afraid of thunderstorms but won't admit it. She draws constantly. She gets that from you. Remember how you used to sketch crime scenes? She's going to need new school clothes soon, and she'll want to help you with whatever work you'll let her help with. Most importantly, she needs to know she's wanted. I hope you can give her that. Ray read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated his shock. Grace had been pregnant when she left. She'd spent 20 years raising their daughter alone, telling Emma stories about the father she'd never met, preparing for this exact moment when their child would need him most. The guilt was overwhelming. While Grace was struggling through single motherhood, working as a teacher to support their daughter, Ray had been living a bachelor's life, focused on his career and telling himself he was better off alone. Grace had been right about one thing. His work had consumed him, but not in the way she'd feared. He'd thrown himself into it to forget the emptiness she'd left behind. Ray, Doc Henderson's voice cut through his emotional spiral. You need to see this. Ray looked up to find Emma standing beside his desk, her small face creased with concern. Sheriff Ray, why are you crying? She asked, her voice soft with the kind of compassion children showed when they recognized adult pain. Ray wiped his eyes, not realizing tears had started falling. I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about your mama. Emma nodded solemnly. It's okay to cry about mama. I still cry sometimes too. She hesitated, then reached into her backpack again. Mama said to give you this if you looked too sad. She handed him a small drawing, obviously created by a child's hand, but filled with remarkable detail. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a house. A tall man wearing what looked like a sheriff's badge, a woman with long hair, and a small girl holding both their hands. Above them, sketched in careful crayon, floated another woman figure, surrounded by what Emma had labeled clouds in her careful printing. At the bottom of the page, Emma had written, "My family with Mama watching." Ray's throat closed completely. This 7-year-old child, who'd lost the only parent she'd ever known, was trying to comfort him. Grace had raised their daughter to be strong, compassionate, and wise beyond her years. Emma, Ray said carefully, did your mama ever tell you anything special about me? About why she wanted you to find me if something happened to her? Emma tilted her head in the gesture so reminiscent of Grace. She said you were my papa, but that you didn't know about me yet. She said you'd be surprised, but happy, and that you'd take care of me because that's what papas do. The simple, honest answer nearly broke him. Grace had told Emma the truth, but had left it to him to confirm it, to step into the role of father if he chose to. Your mama was right, Ray said, his voice rough with emotion. I am your papa, and I am very happy to meet you, even though I'm sad about your mama. Emma's face lit up with the same radiant smile he remembered from Grace. I knew it, she said, matter-of-factly. You have the same hands as me, see? She held up her small hand next to his large one, showing him fingers that were indeed similarly shaped. Deputy Martinez and Doc Henderson exchanged glances over Emma's head. Both had been in Cedar Falls long enough to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Well then, Doc said with forced cheerfulness, seems like we need to figure out sleeping arrangements and such. Emma, you can't stay in the sheriff's office forever. The practical concerns hit Ray like cold water. Emma needed a home, clothing, enrollment in school, medical care, legal guardianship, 1,000 details that stretched beyond his experience with anything more complicated than feeding himself and showing up for work. I have a spare room, Ray said slowly, thinking out loud. But it's not set up for a child. There's no furniture, no, we can fix that, Deputy Martinez interrupted. My sister's kids outgrew their beds last year. She's been trying to get rid of them. She looked at Emma with a warm smile. What do you think, Misha? Would you like to stay with Sheriff Ray while we get everything sorted out? Emma nodded eagerly, then looked at Ray with those achingly familiar eyes. Is it okay if I call you Papa now? Ray knelt down to Emma's level, just as he had that morning outside Murphy's saloon. But now everything had changed. Now he wasn't just a kind sheriff helping a lost child. He was a father meeting his daughter for the first time. I would like that very much, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Emma threw her small arms around his neck, hugging him with the fierce intensity that only children could muster. Ray held her carefully, this precious gift Grace had left him, this second chance at the family he'd never realized he wanted. Over Emma's head, he caught Doc Henderson's knowing smile and Deputy Martinez's approving nod. The community that had watched him remain stubbornly single for 20 years, was already adjusting to the idea of Sheriff Ray Delaney as a father. "Papa," Emma said, pulling back to look at him seriously, "Mama said I should tell you about the money." Ray raised an eyebrow. "What money, sweetheart?" Emma unzipped her backpack once more, producing a bank envelope thick with bills. "Mama saved this for my taking care of money. She said it should help until you figured out the papa things." Even in death, Grace was still taking care of them both, still thinking ahead to practical concerns, while Ray struggled with emotional ones. As the evening shadows lengthened across Cedar Falls' main street, Ray realized his life had been completely transformed in a single day. This morning he'd been a solitary sheriff with no ties beyond his job and his community. Tonight, he was a father responsible for a 7-year-old girl who'd inherited her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Grace's letter had ended with a hope that he could give Emma what she needed most, the knowledge that she was wanted. Looking at his daughter's trusting face, Ray made a silent promise to Grace's memory and to the child they'd created together. Emma Sullivan Delaney was not just wanted, she was treasured, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew it. The next morning brought the harsh reality of what Ray had agreed to. Emma sat at his small kitchen table, swinging her legs and watching him attempt to make breakfast with the intense curiosity of someone studying a fascinating but potentially dangerous experiment. Ray's bachelor kitchen was equipped for basic survival: coffee, toast, the occasional scrambled egg when he felt ambitious. It was not equipped for feeding a 7-year-old who, according to Grace's letter, preferred chocolate chip pancakes and probably expected something more elaborate than burnt toast and bitter coffee. "Do you have any pancake mix, Papa?" Emma asked. Hopefully, her small hands folded politely on the table. "I don't think so, sweetheart." Ray opened cabinet after cabinet, revealing an embarrassing collection of canned soup, crackers, and coffee supplies. "How about cereal?" Emma's face fell. Slightly, but she nodded with the resigned acceptance of a child accustomed to disappointment. "That's okay. Mama said I shouldn't expect people to know about little girl things right away." The comment hit Ray like a gentle rebuke. Grace had spent 7 years learning Emma's preferences, her fears, her needs. Ray was starting from nothing, and every small failure felt magnified by Emma's patient understanding. "Tell you what," Ray said, making a decision. "Let's go to Henderson's general store. We'll get pancake mix and chocolate chips and anything else you might need." Emma's face brightened. "Really? We can get chocolate chips? We can get anything you want," Ray promised, then paused. "Well, within reason. I'm new at this papa business." Emma giggled, a sound that was pure joy and reminded Ray so strongly of Grace that his chest tightened. "Mama said you'd figure it out as you went. She said the best parents are the ones who try hard and love big." By 9 o'clock, they were walking down Cedar Falls Main Street toward Henderson's store, Emma's small hand tucked securely in Ray's much larger one. The morning sun painted everything in soft gold, and Ray noticed details he'd overlooked for years. The way the wooden sidewalks creaked pleasantly underfoot, the cheerful bell that chimed when store doors opened, the comfortable rhythm of small-town life that Emma seemed to absorb with wide-eyed interest. "It's smaller than Millbrook," Emma observed, "but it's prettier. Mama was right. It looks like the towns in storybooks." Henderson's general store occupied the corner building across from the courthouse, its large windows displaying everything from work boots to penny candy. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor's wife of 43 years, looked up from arranging a display of canning supplies when they entered. "Why, Ray Delaney," she said with surprise. "And who might this young lady be?" Ray felt Emma's hand tighten in his. This would be the first of many introductions, many explanations. The story would spread through Cedar Falls before noon, and by evening everyone would know that Sheriff Ray had acquired a daughter overnight. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Emma," Ray said carefully. "She's going to be staying with me for a while." Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes took in Emma's resemblance to someone she couldn't quite place, the way the child stayed close to Ray's side, the protective way Ray's free hand rested on Emma's shoulder. "Well, hello there, Emma," Mrs. Henderson said, with the practiced warmth of someone who'd been greeting children for decades. "What brings you to our little town?" Emma looked up at Ray, clearly uncertain how much she should explain. Ray squeezed her hand gently. "Emma's mama was an old friend of mine," Ray said, staying as close to the truth as possible without opening the door to gossip he wasn't ready to handle. "She asked me to look after Emma for her." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with understanding. She'd been in Cedar Falls long enough to recognize the euphemisms people used when discussing loss and difficult circumstances. "Well, any friend of Sheriff Ray's is welcome here," she said to Emma. "What can we help you find this morning?" Emma's shyness evaporated in the face of Mrs. Henderson's genuine warmth. "We need pancake mix and chocolate chips for breakfast. Papa doesn't have little girl food at his house." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly at the word papa, but she maintained her composure admirably. "Well, we can certainly fix that. Follow me, sweetie." She led them through the store, chatting easily with Emma about different types of pancake mix and the relative merits of milk chocolate versus semi-sweet chocolate chips. Ray watched this interaction with growing appreciation for the woman's kindness and discretion. "Now," Mrs. Henderson said as they reached the breakfast aisle, "does Papa's house have everything a little girl needs? Soap that smells nice? Shampoo that doesn't sting your eyes? A proper toothbrush?" Ray realized with embarrassment that he hadn't thought about any of these necessities. Emma's backpack contained clothes for a few days, but nothing approaching the supplies a child would need for extended care. "We should probably get those things too," Ray admitted. Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. "I raised 3 girls of my own. Let me help you put together a proper list." For the next hour, Mrs. Henderson guided them through the practical necessities Ray had never considered: child-appropriate shampoo and soap, a smaller toothbrush, hair ties and clips, notebooks and crayons for drawing, comfortable pajamas in Emma's size, and a dozen other items that seemed obvious once someone pointed them out. Emma participated in each decision with serious consideration, occasionally mentioning something her mama had used or preferred. Ray found himself taking mental notes, trying to learn his daughter's preferences and needs through observation and her casual comments. "Mama always got the kind that doesn't tangle," Emma said, examining bottles of conditioner with the expertise of someone who'd learned to care for her own hair. "My hair gets really knotty if you don't use the right kind," Ray made another mental note. Emma's auburn hair, so much like Grace's, would require more attention than his simple wash-and-go routine. Their shopping expedition revealed the depth of what Ray didn't know about childcare. Emma needed different soap because adult versions were too harsh for young skin. She required a step stool to reach the bathroom sink. Her clothes needed to be soft and comfortable, not just functional. Even her toothpaste was different, milder flavors that wouldn't overwhelm a child's palate. "Papa," Emma said as they loaded their purchases into Ray's truck, "do I get to live in your house now? Really live there, not just visit?" The question held a weight that squeezed Ray's heart. This child had lost her mother, her caretaker, and now faced the uncertainty of where she belonged in the world. "Yes, sweetheart," Ray said firmly. "You get to live with me for as long as you want to." Emma's smile could have powered the entire town. "Forever?" Ray's throat tightened. "If that's what you want, then forever." They drove back to Ray's house, a modest 2-bedroom on Elm Street that he'd bought 15 years earlier and barely bothered to decorate beyond basic furniture and necessity. Now, seeing it through Emma's eyes, Ray recognized how sparse and unwelcoming it appeared. The living room contained a couch, a coffee table, and a television. The kitchen held the basic appliances and little else. His bedroom was purely functional. The spare room, Emma's room now, was completely empty, except for boxes of old case files and equipment he'd stored over the years. "It's quiet," Emma observed, standing in the living room and looking around with careful assessment. Mama's house had lots of pictures and colors. Ray looked at his walls, realizing they were almost entirely bare, except for a few commendations and certificates that meant nothing to a 7-year-old girl who needed a home, not a sterile living space. "We can fix that," Ray said. "We can get pictures and colors and whatever you need to make it feel like home." Emma wandered through the house with the purposeful exploration of someone claiming new territory. She touched surfaces, opened cabinets with permission, and examined everything with intense curiosity. "Where will I sleep, Papa?" she asked when they reached the empty spare room. "Right here," Ray said. "But first we need to get you some furniture. Deputy Martinez said her sister has beds her kids outgrew. We'll call her and see about getting one set up for you." Emma nodded, then surprised him by walking to the room's single window and pressing her nose against the glass. "I can see the courthouse from here," she announced. "And there's a big tree in the yard. Mama said you'd have a nice house because you take good care of things." The casual mention of Grace's faith in him hit Ray unexpectedly. Even after 20 years apart, even after the hurt and disappointment that had driven her away, Grace had continued to believe in his fundamental character. Ray called Deputy Martinez from his kitchen phone while Emma explored the backyard through the sliding glass door. Sophia answered on the second ring. "Martinez here." "Sophia, it's Ray. About that furniture for Emma, would your sister be willing to part with some of it today? I'm realizing how much a child needs that I don't have." "Already talked to her," Sophia replied with characteristic efficiency. "She's got a twin-bed frame, mattress, dresser, and nightstand, all in good condition. Her husband can bring it over this afternoon if that works." Ray felt a wave of gratitude for his deputy's foresight. "That would be perfect. What do I owe them?" "Nothing. Maria says she's happy to see it go to someone who needs it." "But Ray," Sophia's tone became more serious, "you might want to think about the legal aspects of this situation. Emma's going to need school enrollment, medical care, official guardianship papers. There are procedures." Ray had been dreading this conversation, but he knew Sophia was right. His relationship with Emma might be clear emotionally, but legally he was a stranger with no rights regarding her care. "I know," Ray said heavily. "I was hoping to get through the weekend first. Let her settle in a bit before dealing with the bureaucracy." "The weekend's fine, but Monday you'll need to start making calls. And Ray, you might want to consider getting a lawyer. This isn't going to be simple." After hanging up, Ray found Emma still standing at the back door, studying his yard with the same careful attention she'd given everything else. "It's big," she said when he joined her. "Bigger than our yard in Millbrook. Can I play out there?" "Of course, but let's establish some rules first. You don't leave the yard without telling me. You don't talk to strangers, even if they seem nice. And if anything scares you or seems wrong, you come find me immediately." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mama taught me about stranger danger. She said most people are good, but some aren't, and it's hard to tell the difference when you're little." Another evidence of Grace's wisdom in raising their daughter. She taught Emma to be cautious without making her fearful, prepared without being paranoid. They spent the morning organizing Emma's new possessions and making the house more child-friendly. Ray moved sharp objects to higher shelves, secured cabinet locks on anything potentially dangerous, and cleared a space in the living room where Emma could spread out her drawings and books. Around noon, Sophia's sister Maria arrived with her husband and a truck full of furniture. Maria turned out to be a warm, practical woman with 3 children of her own, and she took one look at Emma and went into full maternal mode. "Mija, let's see about setting up your room properly," she said to Emma. "A girl needs a space that's all her own." For the next 2 hours, Ray watched Maria transform the empty spare room into something that actually looked like a child's bedroom. The twin bed went against one wall with the nightstand beside it. The dresser fit perfectly under the window. Maria had even brought bedding, sheets covered with stars and moons that Emma declared perfect. "Every girl needs pretty sheets," Maria explained to Ray with a knowing smile. "It's one of the most important things." Emma helped arrange her few belongings in the dresser drawers, handling each item with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to take possessions for granted. Her clothes filled only half of one drawer, a stark reminder of how little she'd been able to bring from her previous life. "Papa," Emma said as they finished organizing her room, "can we call this my forever room?" Ray knelt down to her level, struck again by how much courage this small person carried. "Yes, sweetheart, this is your forever room in your forever home with your forever papa." Emma threw her arms around his neck, holding tight with the fierce grip of someone who'd lost too much and finally found something worth holding on to. Over Emma's head, Ray caught Maria's approving nod and her husband's understanding smile. The Latino community in Cedar Falls was tight-knit and family-oriented, and they recognized the signs of a man learning to be a father to a child who desperately needed one. As evening approached and their helpers departed, Ray and Emma stood in her new room surveying their work. The space still looked sparse compared to what Ray imagined a little girl's room should be, but it was functional and welcoming. "Tomorrow we'll get more things," Ray promised. "Pictures for the walls, maybe some toys, whatever you want." Emma looked up at him with those achingly familiar eyes. "I don't need lots of things, Papa. I just need you." The simple statement nearly undid him completely. This remarkable child, who'd lost everything familiar in her world, was grateful for the basics: safety, shelter, and someone who cared about her welfare. Ray realized he was holding something precious and fragile, not just Emma herself, but the opportunity to be the father Grace had always believed he could be. The responsibility felt enormous, but for the first time since finding Emma outside Murphy's saloon, Ray felt ready to embrace it completely. His daughter was home. Now he just had to learn how to be the papa she deserved. Sunday morning arrived, with the gentle sounds of a child moving quietly through an unfamiliar house, trying not to wake the adults. Ray had been awake for 20 minutes, listening to Emma's careful footsteps in the hallway, the soft opening and closing of the bathroom door, the whispered conversation she was having with herself as she explored her new environment. When he finally emerged from his bedroom, Ray found Emma sitting at the kitchen table with one of her drawing pads, creating what appeared to be a detailed map of the house. She'd labeled each room in her careful printing and added decorative flourishes around the borders. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ray said, noting that she was already dressed in clean clothes, her hair brushed and secured with clips they'd bought yesterday. "Did you sleep well?" Emma looked up with a smile that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "I slept really good, Papa. The bed is comfortable and I could see stars through the window before I fell asleep. I'm making a map so I remember where everything is." Ray examined her drawing with genuine admiration. For a 7-year-old, Emma showed remarkable attention to detail and spatial awareness. She'd accurately depicted the house's layout and even included furniture placement. "This is excellent work," Ray said. "You're quite an artist." Emma beamed at the praise. "Mama said I get that from you. She said you used to draw pictures of crime scenes to help solve cases." The observation stopped. Ray cold. He had indeed sketched crime scenes early in his career, finding that drawing helped him notice details he might otherwise miss. It was a practice he'd largely abandoned as technology improved, and photography became the standard method of documentation. "Your Mama was right," Ray said, settling into the chair across from Emma. "I haven't done much drawing in recent years, but I used to find it very helpful." Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "Could you show me? Could you teach me how to draw like a sheriff?" The request touched something deep in Ray's chest. Emma wanted to learn about his work, to understand the part of his life that had once driven Grace away. Perhaps their daughter could be the bridge between the career that had consumed him and the family he'd never known he was missing. "I'd like that very much," Ray said. "After breakfast, I'll show you some of the techniques I used to use." Emma's smile could have powered the entire county. They made pancakes together, Ray following the instructions on the box, while Emma carefully measured chocolate chips, and offered encouragement when he struggled with flipping them without breaking them apart. The kitchen filled with the warm smells of breakfast and the easy chatter of two people learning to be comfortable with each other. Mama always said cooking together was one of the best ways to talk, Emma said, perched on a stool beside the stove. She said you learn about people by watching how they handle food. What do you think you're learning about me? Ray asked. Amused, Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to most questions. You're very careful. You read all the instructions twice before you start, and you measure everything exactly. Mama did that too when she was baking for other people, but when it was just us, she would eyeball everything, and it always turned out perfect anyway. The casual mention of Grace's habits created a bittersweet pang in Ray's chest. Emma carried so many memories of her mother, small details about how Grace lived and moved through the world. These glimpses were precious gifts, but they also reminded Ray of everything he'd missed. After breakfast, they cleared the table and Ray retrieved a notebook and pencils from his office supplies. Emma watched with fascination as he demonstrated basic observation techniques. How to break complex scenes into simple shapes, how to note relationships between objects, how to capture details that might prove important later. The key is to look at everything, Ray explained, sketching the view from their kitchen window. Most people see what they expect to see, but investigators have to see what's actually there. Emma tried copying his technique, creating her own version of the backyard view. Her lines were less steady than his, but her eye for detail was remarkably sophisticated. Why did you become a sheriff, Papa? Emma asked as she worked on shading. A tree trunk. Mama said you always wanted to help people, but there are lots of ways to help people. Ray paused in his own sketching, considering how to explain something he'd never fully examined himself. I suppose I liked the idea of solving puzzles, he said slowly. When something bad happens, there are usually clues that can lead you to the truth. I found I was good at finding those clues and putting them together. Like detective stories, Emma said with understanding. Mama used to read me detective stories sometimes. She said the best detectives care more about justice than about being right. Another piece of Grace's wisdom, preserved in their daughter's memory. Ray wondered how many conversations Grace had shaped to prepare Emma for eventually meeting him. How many bedtime stories had been subtle lessons about the man who was her. Father, your mama was very wise, Ray said. I miss her, Emma said quietly, her pencil stilling on the paper. I know she's with the angels, but I still miss talking to her. Ray set down his own pencil and moved his chair closer to Emma's. It's okay to miss her, sweetheart. Missing someone means you love them very much, and that's a beautiful thing. Emma leaned against his side, a small gesture that filled Ray with fierce protectiveness. Do you miss her too, Papa? The question was so innocently direct that Ray had to take a moment to compose his answer. Yes, I miss her very much. I missed her for 20 years before she went to the angels, and I'll probably miss her for the rest of my life. But you're not sad all the time, Emma observed. You smile when you look at me. Ray's throat tightened with emotion. That's because when I look at you, I see the best parts of your mama. You make me happy and sad at the same time, sweetheart. Happy because you're here with me and sad because she's not. Emma nodded, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children sometimes showed toward complex emotions adults struggled to understand. Mama said you might feel that way. She said it was okay, as long as the happy part was bigger than the sad part. They worked on their drawings in comfortable silence for a while. The morning sun streaming through the kitchen windows and birds chattering in the backyard trees. Ray found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of sharing an activity with someone who genuinely wanted to learn from him. The peaceful moment was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Ray glanced at the clock, just past 10 on a Sunday morning, too early for casual visitors, but not unusual for someone with urgent business. Stay here, sweetheart, Ray said, instinctively moving into sheriff mode. Let me see who that is. Through the front window, Ray saw a woman he didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed despite the weekend, carrying a briefcase and clipboard that immediately suggested official business. Ray opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you, Sheriff Delaney? I'm Patricia Patterson from County Social Services. I understand you have a minor child in your custody who may require our intervention." Ray's blood ran cold. He'd known this moment would come, but he'd hoped for more time to establish his relationship with Emma before dealing with bureaucratic complications. "Emma is my daughter," Ray said carefully. "She's staying with me." Miss Patterson consulted her clipboard with the efficient detachment of someone who'd handled hundreds of similar cases. "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple, Sheriff. We received a report that an unaccompanied minor was found in Cedar Falls and is currently residing with you without proper legal documentation of your guardianship rights." Ray heard Emma's chair scrape against the kitchen floor and knew she was trying to listen to the conversation. This was the moment he'd dreaded, when the legal system would potentially separate him from the daughter he'd just found. "Ms. Patterson, I have documentation proving Emma is my child," Ray said, trying to keep his voice level. "Her mother left specific instructions that she was to come to me if anything happened to her." "I'm sure you do. And I'm not here to remove the child today," Ms. Patterson said with practiced reassurance. "But we do need to schedule a formal evaluation of the living situation and review all relevant documentation. There are proper procedures that must be followed to ensure the child's best interests are protected." Ray stepped outside, pulling the door partially closed behind him to prevent Emma from hearing details that might frighten her. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we need to verify your identity, your relationship to the child, your fitness as a guardian, and the stability of your living situation," Miss Patterson explained. "We'll also need to interview the child to ensure she feels safe and is being properly cared for." "And if you decide I'm not suitable," Ray asked, dreading the answer, "then we'll explore alternative placement options. Foster care, relatives if any can be located, adoption services if necessary." The thought of Emma being taken away, placed with strangers who didn't know about her love for chocolate chip pancakes or her fear of thunderstorms, made Ray's chest tighten with panic. "How long do I have?" Ray asked. Miss Patterson consulted her calendar. "I can schedule the initial evaluation for Tuesday afternoon. That will give you time to gather your documentation and prepare the child for the interview process." After Ms. Patterson left, with promises to call Monday morning to confirm the appointment, Ray returned to the kitchen to find Emma exactly where he'd left her, but her drawing had changed. She'd added a new figure to her sketch of the backyard, a woman in a dress standing at the edge of the property, looking toward the house. "Who was that lady, Papa?" Emma asked without looking up from her paper. Ray sat down beside her, trying to project calm confidence he didn't feel. "Her name is Ms. Patterson. She works for the county, helping make sure children are safe and well cared for." Emma's hand stilled on her pencil. "Is she going to take me away?" The direct question cut through Ray's attempt at gentle explanation. Emma was smart enough to understand the implications of a social worker's visit. "Not if I can help it," Ray said firmly, "but she needs to make sure I know how to take good care of you and that you're happy living here with me." Emma looked up at him with those achingly familiar eyes. "What if she decides you don't know how to be a papa yet?" Ray's heart clenched at the fear he saw in her expression. This child had already lost too much. The possibility of losing him too must be terrifying. "Then we'll prove to her that we belong together," Ray said, reaching for Emma's small hand. "Can you help me do that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "What do we need to do?" Ray looked around his sparse kitchen, his barely decorated house, his life that had been comfortable for a bachelor but might not meet the standards expected for a child's home. "We need to make this feel like a real family lives here," Ray said, "and we need to show her that I'm learning to be the papa you deserve." Emma squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "You already are, Papa. You just need to believe it too." Her simple faith in him was both humbling and inspiring. Ray realized that Emma's confidence in their relationship might be the key to convincing social services that they belonged together. He just hoped it would be enough. Monday morning brought a flurry of activity as Ray attempted to transform his bachelor existence into something that would satisfy a social worker's standards for child welfare. Emma helped with the enthusiasm of someone who understood the stakes involved, though she approached the challenge with a 7-year-old's unique perspective on what constituted proper preparation. "Papa, you need more pictures," Emma announced, surveying the living room with critical eyes. "Miss Patterson is going to think we don't have any memories." Ray looked at his bare walls with new awareness. The few framed commendations and certificates that had seemed adequate for his solitary life now appeared sterile and unwelcoming through Emma's eyes. "What kind of pictures do you think we need?" Ray asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. Emma considered this seriously. "Family pictures, pictures of people being happy together. Mama always said pictures tell stories about who lives in a house and what they care about." The problem was, Ray didn't have family pictures to display. His parents had died years ago. He had no siblings, and his social life had been limited to work relationships and casual friendships that rarely involved photography. Emma was his first real family in decades. "We could take some new pictures," Ray suggested. "Pictures of us together, starting our own family stories." Emma's face lit up. "Really? We could take pictures and put them in frames like a real family?" Her excitement was infectious, but it also highlighted how much she'd lost when Grace died. Emma was hungry for the symbols and structures of family life, for the visible proof that she belonged somewhere and was cherished by someone. They spent the morning shopping for picture frames, a camera, and other items that would make the house feel more like a home where a child was wanted and loved. At Walmart in the neighboring town, Emma approached each purchase with serious consideration. "This one has flowers," she said, examining a frame with delicate roses painted around the border. "Mama liked flowers. She said they made everything prettier." Ray found himself seeing ordinary objects through Emma's eyes. Throw pillows that would make the couch more inviting, a colorful tablecloth that would brighten the kitchen, small decorations that would signal to a social worker that a child's preferences mattered in this household. Back home, they embarked on an impromptu photo session that revealed both Ray's inexperience with cameras and Emma's natural ability to light up whenever someone pointed a lens in her direction. She posed with patient good humor as Ray figured out the camera's settings, offering suggestions and encouragement that reminded him powerfully of Grace's ability to make any task feel like an adventure. "Take one of me in my room, Papa," Emma suggested, "so people can see that I have my own special place." Ray captured images of Emma, surrounded by her few possessions, her smile radiant despite the sparse surroundings. In the photographs, her joy was unmistakable, the happiness of a child who'd found safety and acceptance after a period of uncertainty and loss. "Now one of both of us," Emma insisted. "Mama taught me how to work the timer thing." Emma set up the camera with competent efficiency that suggested Grace had indeed taught her photography basics. She arranged them on the couch, Ray's arm around her small shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera with genuine contentment. When the timer flashed, capturing their first official father-daughter photograph, Ray felt something shift in his chest. This was real. They were a family now, documented and official, with photographic evidence of their connection. The afternoon brought a phone call that Ray had been both expecting and dreading. Ms. Patterson's voice carried the brisk efficiency of someone managing multiple cases simultaneously. "Sheriff Delaney, I'm calling to confirm our appointment for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll need to review your documentation, inspect the living premises, and conduct a brief interview with Emma." "We'll be ready," Ray assured her, though his stomach churned with anxiety. "I should mention that I've received additional information about this case," Ms. Patterson continued. "We've been in contact with authorities in Millbrook regarding Emma's previous living situation. There are some questions about the circumstances that led to her traveling to Cedar Falls unaccompanied." Ray's grip tightened on the phone. What? Own kind of questions? Nothing that suggests wrongdoing on anyone's part, but we need to establish a clear timeline of events and ensure that proper protocols were followed. I'll explain more when we meet. After hanging up, Ray found Emma in her room, arranging her few stuffed animals on the bed with careful attention to their placement. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway, her expression unusually serious. "Is Miss Patterson going to ask me hard questions, Papa?" Ray sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "She's going to ask you about your mama, about how you came to Cedar Falls, and about whether you feel safe and happy here with me." Emma nodded solemnly. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "There are no wrong things, sweetheart. Just tell her the truth about how you feel and what you need." Emma was quiet for a moment, then reached under her pillow and pulled out a folded piece of paper Ray hadn't seen before. "Mama wrote this for me to give to someone if they asked about Papa," she said, handing him the paper. "She said it would help them understand." Ray unfolded the document with trembling fingers. It was a letter in Grace's handwriting addressed to whom it may concern and dated just 2 weeks before her death. "My name is Grace Marie Sullivan, and I'm writing this letter in case questions arise about my daughter Emma's placement with Sheriff Ray Delaney of Cedar Falls County. Ray Delaney is Emma's biological father, though he was unaware of her existence due to my decision to leave Cedar Falls while pregnant. I take full responsibility for this choice and any complications it may cause. I have prepared Emma to locate Ray if anything should happen to me, because I believe he is the best person to care for her welfare and future. Throughout our relationship, 20 years ago, Ray demonstrated integrity, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others. I have followed his career from a distance and have seen nothing to change my opinion of his character. Emma has been raised knowing about her father and understanding that he is a good man who would love her if given the chance. I have prepared her for the possibility of needing to travel to Cedar Falls and have provided her with the resources and information necessary to reach Ray safely. If anyone questions Emma's placement or Ray's suitability as her guardian, please know that this arrangement represents my deepest wish and most careful planning. I would trust Ray Delaney with my own life, and I am trusting him with something even more precious, our daughter's future. Sincerely, Grace Marie Sullivan. The letter was notarized and witnessed, giving it legal weight that might prove crucial. In tomorrow's evaluation, once again Grace had thought ahead, anticipating challenges and preparing solutions that would protect both Ray and Emma. "She thought of everything, didn't she?" Ray said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma nodded. "Mama was really smart about planning things. She said if you're going to trust someone with something important, you should make it as easy as possible for them to succeed." That evening, Ray called Doc Henderson to ask for a character reference and was surprised when Doc offered to attend the social services meeting as a community representative. "Ray, that little girl belongs with you," Doc said firmly. "Anyone with eyes can see how much you care about her and how much she's thriving in your care. If that social worker needs convincing, I'll be happy to provide it." Similar offers came from Deputy Martinez, Mrs. Henderson from the general store, and even Maria, Sophia's sister, who'd provided Emma's bedroom furniture. The community that had watched Ray remain stubbornly single for 20 years was rallying to support his new role as a father. As bedtime approached, Ray found himself following a routine they'd established over their few nights together. Emma bathed herself, but called for help with the tangles in her hair. She brushed her teeth while telling him about everything she'd learned that day. She chose a book for him to read aloud, then listened with the focused attention of someone who'd learned to treasure these quiet moments of connection. Tonight's book was one they'd bought that afternoon, a story about a sheriff who solved mysteries. With the help of his daughter, Emma had chosen it deliberately, Ray suspected, as another way of reinforcing their partnership in the face of tomorrow's evaluation. "Papa," Emma said, as Ray finished the story. "Are you scared about tomorrow?" Ray considered lying, offering the kind of false reassurance adults often gave children to protect them from worry. But Emma had already shown remarkable resilience and maturity. She deserved honesty. "A little," Ray admitted. "I want Miss Patterson to understand how much you mean to me and how much I want to be your papa forever." Emma reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his much larger ones. "Then just tell her the truth. Mama always said the truth," was the strongest thing anyone could use. As Ray tucked Emma into her bed, surrounded by the framed photographs they'd taken that day, he realized that his daughter had become his teacher in the brief time they'd known each other. She was showing him how to be brave, how to trust, and how to build a family from hope and determination. Tomorrow would bring questions and scrutiny, but tonight they were simply a father and daughter who'd found each other against impossible odds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That had to be enough. Tuesday afternoon arrived with the weight of everything Ray had never realized he wanted hanging in the balance. Emma dressed carefully for the social services evaluation, choosing her prettiest dress and insisting on wearing the small silver bracelet that had been one of Grace's few pieces of jewelry. She approached the appointment with the seriousness of someone who understood that her future depended on the next few hours. Miss Patterson arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, accompanied by a younger woman she introduced as her assistant, Ms. Rodriguez. They brought clipboards, forms, and the kind of professional detachment that Ray recognized from his own work, the necessary emotional distance that allowed people to make difficult decisions about other people's lives. "Sheriff Delaney, this is quite a lovely home," Miss Patterson said, as Ray led them into the living room. Her trained eyes swept the space, taking note of the new photographs, the child-appropriate decorations, the visible evidence that a little girl lived here and was cherished. Emma sat on the couch between Ray and where Doc Henderson would join them, her small hands folded in her lap, her expression politely attentive. She'd practiced answering potential questions with Ray, but now faced the reality of adults who would determine whether she could stay with the only father she'd ever known. "Emma, sweetie, we're going to have a little chat," Miss Patterson said, with the practiced warmth of someone who interviewed children regularly. "There are no right or wrong answers. We just want to make sure you're happy and safe." Doc Henderson arrived as promised, bringing both his medical credentials and his 60 years of community standing. His presence seemed to ease some of the formal tension in the room, and Ray felt grateful for the older man's steady support. The interview began with basic questions. Emma's full name, her age, her mother's name, how she'd traveled to Cedar Falls. Emma answered each question clearly and honestly, occasionally glancing at Ray for reassurance, but speaking with remarkable composure. "Can you tell me about your mama, Emma?" Miss Patterson asked gently. Emma's face softened with love and loss. "Mama was the best mama in the whole world. She was a teacher, and she helped kids learn to read better. She made really good pancakes, and she sang when she was happy, and she always knew what to do when I was scared or sad. And she got sick," Miss Patterson prompted. Emma nodded, her voice becoming smaller. "She got really sick and had to go to the hospital. She tried to get better, but sometimes people are too sick for the doctors to fix them. Mama said it wasn't anybody's fault, especially not mine." Ray's chest tightened as he listened to Emma recite the facts of her mother's illness, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children sometimes developed toward loss. Grace had clearly worked to help Emma understand death without feeling responsible or abandoned. "What did your mama tell you about Sheriff Delaney?" Miss Patterson asked. Emma's posture straightened, and she looked directly at Ray with obvious pride. "She told me he was my papa, but that he didn't know about me yet, because she made a mistake when she was young. She said he was the bravest, keenest man she ever knew, and that he spent his whole life keeping people safe." Ms. Patterson made notes on her clipboard. "And how do you feel about living with Sheriff Delaney now?" Emma's answer came without hesitation. "He's the best papa I could ever have. He makes me chocolate chip pancakes, and he's teaching me how to draw like a detective, and he reads me stories every night. But mostly he makes me feel safe, like Mama said he would. Are you ever afraid here, Emma? Ms. Rodriguez asked, speaking. For the first time, Emma considered this question with the careful thought she brought to most things. I was afraid at first because everything was new, and I missed Mama so much it hurt in my stomach. But Papa never gets angry, even when I ask too many questions or forget to put my clothes in the hamper. He just helps me learn how to do things better. Ray felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma's simple faith in him was both humbling and terrifying. What if he couldn't live up to her expectations? What if his inexperience with children led to mistakes that hurt her? The interview continued with questions about Emma's daily routine, her sleeping arrangements, her meals, and her overall happiness. Emma answered each question with honesty that revealed how quickly she'd adapted to life with Ray, but also how much she still grieved for her mother. Sometimes I dream about Mama, Emma said, when Miss Patterson asked about nightmares. But Papa says it's okay to dream about people we love, even if it makes us sad sometimes. He said Mama would want me to remember the happy times we had together. Doc Henderson spoke up for the first time. If I may add something, he said, in his authoritative but gentle voice. I've been the physician for this community for over 40 years. I've watched Ray Delaney grow from a young deputy into one of the finest men I've ever known. In the past week, I've seen him transform into a devoted father who puts Emma's needs above everything else. Miss Patterson turned to Ray. Sheriff, can you tell me about your long-term plans for Emma's care? Education, medical needs, that sort of thing? Ray had prepared for this question, but answering it felt like making vows that would determine the course of both their lives. I've already contacted the school district about enrolling Emma for the fall semester. Doc Henderson has agreed to be her pediatrician, and I'm in the process of adding her to my health insurance. As for the future, I want Emma to have every opportunity to grow up happy and secure, to pursue whatever interests and dreams she develops. And your work schedule? Law enforcement can be demanding, with irregular hours and dangerous situations. I've spoken with my supervisors about adjusting my responsibilities, Ray replied. Deputy Martinez is willing to take on more field duties, and I can handle more of the administrative work that allows me to be home consistently for Emma. My first priority is being the father she needs me to be. Miss Patterson looked around the room, taking in the family photographs, Emma's artwork displayed on the refrigerator, the visible signs of a child who was not just housed, but genuinely welcomed into this home. Emma, sweetie, is there anything else you'd like us to know? Anything that would help us understand how you feel about living here? Emma was quiet for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. I wrote you a letter, she said, handing it to Miss Patterson. In case I forgot to say something important. Miss Patterson unfolded the paper and read Emma's careful printing aloud. Dear Miss Patterson, my name is Emma, and Papa is teaching me to write better letters. I want you to know that I am very happy living with my Papa Ray. He takes good care of me, and he loves me very much. I know this because he tells me every day, and also because of how he looks at me like I am the most important thing in the whole world. I miss my mama, but she is watching over us from heaven, and she is happy that me and Papa found each other. Papa says we are a real family now, and I believe him. Please don't take me away from my Papa. He needs me, and I need him, and we are better together than apart. Love, Emma Delaney. I like my new name. Ray's vision blurred as he listened to Emma's words. She'd taken his name without anyone asking her to, claiming their relationship with the confidence of a child who'd finally found where she belonged. Miss Patterson folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her file. That's a beautiful letter, Emma. Thank you for sharing it with us. The formal interview portion concluded with Ms. Patterson and Ms. Rodriguez inspecting Emma's room, the kitchen, and other areas of the house to ensure they met safety standards for childcare. Ray watched them evaluate his home with new eyes, seeing both its adequacy and its limitations through their professional perspective. "Sheriff Delaney," Ms. Patterson said as they concluded their inspection, "I want to be clear about our findings. Emma appears to be thriving in your care. She's clean, well-fed, appropriately housed, and obviously feels secure and loved. The home environment is suitable, and you've demonstrated genuine commitment to her welfare." Ray's heart hammered against his ribs. "But?" "No buts, actually," Ms. Patterson said with a slight smile, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown all afternoon. "Based on today's evaluation, I'm recommending that Emma remain in your custody. We'll need to initiate formal adoption proceedings if that's what you both want, but there's no reason to disrupt what is clearly a positive placement." Emma launched herself at Ray with a delighted squeal, her arms wrapping around his waist with fierce joy. "We did it, Papa! We proved we're a real family!" Doc Henderson beamed from his chair, and even Ms. Rodriguez smiled at Emma's exuberant celebration. "There will be follow-up visits," Ms. Patterson explained as she gathered her materials. "Standard procedure for new placements. But frankly, Sheriff, you and Emma have one of the most natural parent-child bonds I've seen in my 15 years of social work." After the social workers left, Ray found himself sitting on his front porch, with Emma curled up beside him, both of them still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. They were safe, they were legal, they were officially a family. "Papa," Emma said, her voice sleepy with emotional exhaustion, "Mama was right about you." "What did she tell you about me?" Ray asked, stroking Emma's hair with gentle fingers. "Said you were the kind of person who did the right thing, even when it was hard, and that you'd love me like I was the most precious thing in the world." Ray pressed a kiss to the top of Emma's head, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo, and the indefinable smell that was uniquely hers. "Your mama was right, sweetheart. You're the most precious thing in the world." As the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Ray reflected on the week that had transformed his entire existence. 7 days ago, he'd been a solitary man with a routine job and a quiet life. Tonight, he was a father with a daughter who called him Papa and trusted him with her future. Grace's final gift to him hadn't just been Emma. It had been the chance to become the man Grace had always believed he could be. A man worthy of such trust, such love, such overwhelming responsibility and joy. Emma fell asleep against his side as the stars began to appear, and Ray sat in the growing darkness, holding his daughter and marveling at the way life could change. Everything in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons in parenthood, new opportunities to prove himself worthy of the trust both Grace and Emma had placed in him. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Ray Delaney felt completely at peace with his life and utterly certain about his future. He was exactly where he belonged. 3 weeks after the successful social services evaluation, Ray thought he understood the scope of Grace's planning and the depth of her love for their daughter. He was wrong on both counts. The revelation came through an unexpected phone call on a quiet Thursday morning. Ray was teaching Emma how to properly dust for fingerprints using cocoa powder and clear tape, a technique that fascinated her and reminded him why he'd fallen in love with investigative work in the first place. When his office phone rang, "Sheriff Delaney, this is Margaret Foster from Foster, Williams and Associates in Millbrook. I was Grace Sullivan's attorney." Ray felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. Legal calls rarely brought good news, and he'd grown protective of the peaceful life he and Emma were building together. "How can I help you, Ms. Foster?" "I'm calling because I have documents and personal effects that Grace left with instructions to deliver to you after Emma was safely placed in your care. I understand from social services that the placement has been approved." "Yes?" Ray confirmed, watching Emma carefully brush cocoa powder across a glass surface, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Emma is doing very well here. Excellent. Grace would have been very pleased. Miss Foster's voice carried genuine warmth. Sheriff, could you come to Millbrook sometime this week? What Grace left for you really should be handled in person. Ray arranged to meet with the attorney the following day, leaving Emma with Deputy Martinez and Sophia's extended family, who had essentially adopted her as an honorary niece. The drive to Millbrook gave Ray time to wonder what Grace might have left behind that required such formal legal handling. Foster, Williams and Associates occupied a modest office building in downtown Millbrook, and Margaret Foster turned out to be a woman in her 50s with the kind of efficient warmth Ray associated with small-town professionals who'd built their practices on genuine care for their clients. Sheriff Delaney, Grace spoke of you often, Miss Foster said as she led Ray into her office. She was so proud of your career, your integrity, and your commitment to serving others. She followed your professional accomplishments closely. The office was lined with file cabinets and legal books, but Ray's attention was immediately drawn to a large banker's box sitting on Ms. Foster's desk, along with a manila envelope that looked official and weighty. Grace came to me about 6 months before her death, Miss Foster explained, settling into her chair behind the desk. She was already ill, though not yet critically so, and she wanted to ensure that her affairs were properly arranged for Emma's benefit. Miss Foster opened the manila envelope first, revealing documents that made Ray's hands tremble as he read. These are preliminary adoption papers, Miss Foster explained. Grace began the legal process of arranging for you to adopt Emma months before her death. She'd already established paternity through genetic testing. Apparently she'd kept some personal items of yours from 20 years ago that contained DNA samples. Ray stared at the documents, his mind reeling. Grace had been planning this reunion for months, working through legal channels to ensure it would go smoothly when the time came. But there's more, Miss Foster continued, opening the banker's box. Grace was far more thorough in her preparations than even I initially realized. The box contained photograph albums, carefully organized and labeled. Ray opened the first album to find pictures of Emma from birth through age 7, but these weren't random snapshots. They were systematically documented milestones, each photo accompanied by Grace's careful notes about Emma's development, her interests, her personality traits, her fears and joys. Grace created what she called an instruction manual for Emma's care, Ms. Foster explained. She documented everything she thought you'd need to know about raising your daughter. Ray turned pages filled with Grace's handwriting. Emma's favorite: comfort food when she's sick, chicken soup with alphabet noodles, no vegetables. She'll pick them out anyway. She's afraid of thunderstorms but won't admit it. Sit with her and tell stories about brave people. She responds better to distraction than direct comfort. Emma loves to help with cooking and household tasks. She needs to feel useful, like she's contributing. This comes from losing her mother. She worries about being a burden. She's extremely bright, but sometimes needs time to process new information. Don't rush her answers to questions. Page after page of observations, advice, and intimate knowledge about their daughter that Grace had painstakingly recorded for his benefit. There's more, Miss Foster said gently, removing a second album from the box. This album contained photographs Ray had never seen, pictures of himself throughout the past 20 years, taken from a distance. Grace at his commendation ceremonies, standing in the back of crowds, Grace outside the courthouse during high-profile cases, watching him work. Grace at community events where he'd spoken, always maintaining her distance but clearly keeping on track of his life. She never stopped loving you, Sheriff, Miss Foster said quietly. She told me she'd made a terrible mistake 20 years ago, but that her pride and fear had prevented her from trying to fix it until it was almost too late. Ray's vision blurred as he studied the photographs. For 20 years, Grace had been present at the margins of his life, watching him, caring about his welfare, remaining connected to him even though he'd never known she was there. "Why didn't she come back sooner?" Ray asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Why wait until she was dying?" Ms. Foster considered her words carefully. "Grace was terrified that you might reject Emma or feel trapped by sudden fatherhood. She spent years watching you, trying to determine if you'd become the kind of man who could handle learning about a daughter you'd never known existed." She pulled another document from the box, a thick letter addressed to Ray in Grace's familiar handwriting. "Grace. I wrote this about a month before her death," Ms. Foster said. "She called it her full explanation and asked me to give it to you after you'd had time to bond with Emma." Ray opened the letter with trembling fingers. "My dearest Ray, if you're reading this, then Emma has found you, and you've chosen to keep her. I pray that by now you understand what a remarkable child she is, and how much joy she can bring to your life, if you let her. I need to tell you the whole truth about why I stayed away for so long, and why I finally found the courage to bring Emma to you. For 20 years, I told myself I was protecting all of us by staying away. I convinced myself that you were better off without the burden of a family, that Emma was better off without a father who might resent her for tying him down, and that I was being noble by handling everything alone. But the real truth is that I was a coward. I was terrified that you might look at me and see someone who'd deceived you, someone who'd stolen 20 years of your daughter's childhood from you through pride and stubbornness. I was afraid you might forgive me for Emma's sake, but never truly forgive me in your heart. So I watched you from afar instead. I attended every public event where you were honored for your service. I read every newspaper article that mentioned your name. I collected photographs and newspaper clippings like a lovesick teenager, building a shrine to the man I'd never stopped loving, but was too afraid to approach. I know how that sounds. Obsessive, perhaps even disturbing. But it was the only way I could stay connected to you while maintaining the distance I thought was necessary. Through those 20 years of watching, I saw you become everything I'd always known you could be. You became a leader, a protector, a man of integrity who earned the respect of everyone around you. More importantly, I saw signs that you'd never found the kind of happiness we'd shared together. I saw a man who threw himself into his work because he didn't have anyone waiting at home. I saw someone who served others beautifully but might be lonely in his private moments. That gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, you might welcome the chance to have a family after all. When I got sick, when I realized my time was running out, I finally found the courage I should have had 20 years ago. I started planning Emma's journey to you, preparing her for the possibility of needing to find her father, creating all these documents and instructions because I desperately wanted to make it as easy as possible for you to succeed as her parent. But Ray, I need you to know that everything I did was ultimately selfish. I wasn't just giving you a daughter, I was giving myself peace. I couldn't face eternity knowing that Emma might end up with strangers when she had a father who could love her completely if given the chance. I also couldn't face eternity without at least trying to give you the family I'd stolen from you through my own fear and pride. By now you've probably realized that Emma is extraordinary. She's smart like you, stubborn like both of us, and kind in ways that constantly surprise me. She's also remarkably resilient. Losing me was devastating for her, but she's stronger than I ever imagined a 7-year-old could be. She's going to challenge you, Ray. She's going to ask questions you can't answer, need things you don't know how to provide, and push you to be better than you knew you could be. But she's also going to love you with the fierce, uncomplicated devotion that children give to parents who earn their trust. I've watched you for 20 years, and I know you have the capacity to be the father Emma needs. You have patience, wisdom, integrity, and a deep well of compassion that you sometimes hide behind professional detachment. Emma will bring out the best parts of your character, just as she brought out the best parts of mine. Please don't spend your energy being angry with me for the years we lost. Instead, focus on the years you have ahead with our daughter. Love her enough for both of us. Guide her, protect her, and help her become the remarkable woman I know she has the potential to be. And Ray, be happy. Let Emma's love heal the wounds I caused with my cowardice. Let yourself experience the joy of being someone's whole world, because that's what you are to her now. That's what you always could have been to me if I'd been brave enough to let you. All my love, always and forever. Grace P.S. In the bottom of this box, you'll find my engagement ring, the one you gave me 20 years ago. I've kept it all these years, hoping someday I'd have the courage to wear it again. Since that didn't happen, I want Emma to have it when she's old enough to understand what it represents. It's proof that real love can survive time, distance, and even the mistakes of stubborn, frightened people. Ray's hands shook as he reached into the bottom of the banker's box and pulled out a small velvet box he remembered purchasing with his entire savings account when he was 38 years old and completely certain that Grace Sullivan was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. The diamond was exactly as he remembered, not large or flashy, but chosen with care and set in a simple band that Grace had admired in the jewelry store window. She'd worn it for exactly 6 weeks before their fight, before pride and fear had destroyed everything they'd built together. She kept it all these years, Ray said, his voice barely above a whisper. She said it was the most precious thing she owned aside from Emma, Ms. Foster confirmed. She wanted you to know that despite everything that went wrong between you, her feelings for you never changed. Ray sat in Margaret Foster's office, surrounded by the evidence of Grace's 20-year vigil, and finally understood the full scope of what she'd done. She hadn't just prepared Emma to find him. She'd spent 2 decades preparing herself to trust him with their daughter's future. Grace had loved him continuously, completely, and from a distance that must have been agony for her. She documented his life, celebrated his successes, and held on to hope that someday they might find their way back to each other. Death had made that reunion impossible, but Grace's love had made their daughter's future possible. "Sheriff," Ms. Foster said gently, "there's one more thing. Grace established a trust fund for Emma's education and future needs. She also left instructions for a college fund that should provide Emma with every opportunity to pursue her dreams. Even in death, Grace was still taking care of them both, still planning ahead to ensure Emma would have every advantage possible." Ray drove back to Cedar Falls with Grace's ring in his pocket and his understanding of the past 20 years completely transformed. Grace hadn't abandoned him. She'd loved him from a distance, protecting what she thought were his best interests while sacrificing her own happiness in the process. When he arrived home, Emma was in the backyard helping Deputy Martinez tend the small garden they'd planted together. She looked up when Ray emerged from the house, her face lighting up with the joy she always showed when he appeared. "Papa, look what we planted. Deputy Sophia says we'll have tomatoes and carrots by summer." Ray knelt down and pulled Emma into his arms, holding her with the fierce gratitude of someone who just realized how close he'd come to missing the most important relationship of his life. "I love you, sweetheart," Ray said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you more than anything in the world." Emma hugged him back with equal intensity. "I love you too, Papa. Mama said you would love me like this, but feeling it is even better than she promised." That night, after Emma was asleep, Ray sat in his living room looking at Grace's engagement ring and finally understanding the full circle their story had traveled. Grace's love for him had created Emma, sustained Emma, and ultimately brought Emma home to him. The ring would wait for Emma to grow up, a symbol of love that had endured despite separation and silence. But Emma herself was Grace's true gift. Not just a daughter, but proof that love could survive anything, even time and death, and the mistakes of people too proud to admit they needed each other. Ray had spent 20 years thinking Grace had chosen to leave him. Tonight, He realized she'd spent 20 years choosing to love him from a distance, waiting for the right moment to trust him with the most precious thing in her world. Tomorrow, he would tell Emma about her mother's engagement ring and what it represented. Tonight, he would simply hold on to the knowledge that Grace's love had made everything, Emma's existence, their reunion, their future together, possible. The weeks following Ray's visit to Millbrook brought a profound shift in his understanding of the past and his vision of the future. Armed with Grace's detailed instructions and the knowledge of her 20-year vigil, Ray found himself approaching fatherhood with new confidence and deeper purpose. Emma, sensitive to the subtle changes in his demeanor, seemed to bloom even more fully under his increasingly assured care. "Papa, you're different," Emma observed one morning as they worked together on her reading homework. "Not bad different, good different. Like you're not worried about making mistakes anymore." Ray paused in helping her sound out a particularly challenging word, struck by his daughter's perceptiveness. "What makes you think I was worried before?" Emma considered this with the careful thought she brought to most questions. "You used to watch me a lot, like you were waiting for me to need something you didn't know how to give me. Now, you just know things about me." She was right. Grace's instruction manual had provided insights into Emma's personality and needs that would have taken Ray months to discover on his own. More importantly, learning about Grace's continuous love had freed him from the guilt and inadequacy that had shadowed his early attempts at parenting. The discovery of Grace's preserved wedding dress in the bottom of Margaret Foster's banker's box had been the final piece of evidence that Grace had never given up hope for their reunion. The dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper and cedar, represented dreams that had never died despite 20 years of separation. Ray had brought the dress home and, after much consideration, decided to share its significance with Emma. She'd listened to the story with the grave attention she gave to important matters, asking thoughtful questions about love and hope and the ways people sometimes made mistakes that took years to repair. "So Mama kept her wedding dress because she still loved you even when she couldn't be with you?" Emma had asked. "That's right, sweetheart. Your mama kept a lot of things that reminded her of our love, including this dress that she was going to wear when we got married." Emma had touched the delicate fabric with reverent fingers. "It's beautiful. Mama would have looked like a princess." "She looked like a princess in everything she wore," Ray had replied, then made a decision that surprised him with its rightness. "Emma, would you like to keep this dress in your room? Someday, when you're old enough to understand everything about love and marriage, maybe you'd like to wear it yourself." Emma's eyes had widened with wonder and the kind of deep responsibility children felt when entrusted with family treasures. "Really? I could wear Mama's wedding dress when I get married someday. If you want to, and if you find someone who loves you the way your Mama and I loved each other." The dress now hung in Emma's closet, visible reminder of the love story that had created her and the dreams that had shaped her mother's life. Emma checked on it regularly, treating it with the reverence due a sacred object. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ray began making plans that extended far beyond the day-to-day routines they'd established. Emma's official adoption proceedings were moving forward smoothly, with a court date scheduled for early December. Ray had consulted with Margaret Foster about the legal requirements and felt confident that the formalities would proceed without complications. More importantly, he was planning something that felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary, a visit to Grace's grave. Emma had mentioned several times that she wanted to show Mama her new home, her new papa, and all the drawings she'd made of their life together. Ray had been reluctant to make the journey to Millbrook Cemetery, partly because his own grief was still raw, partly because he wasn't sure how Emma would handle visiting the place where her mother was buried. But Grace's instruction manual had included guidance about this too. "Emma will need to visit my grave when she's ready. Don't rush her, but don't prevent her either. She processes loss better when she can maintain some connection to the person she's lost. Take flowers, Yellow roses were always my favorite. Let her talk to me like I'm listening, because for her, I am. Doc Henderson had offered to accompany them on the visit, recognizing that both Ray and Emma might need support for such an emotional journey. Deputy Martinez had volunteered to handle Ray's duties for the day, and the entire community seemed to understand the significance of this pilgrimage. "Are you ready for this, sweetheart?" Ray asked Emma the morning of their planned visit. They'd discussed it for weeks, and Emma had been the one to finally say she was ready to introduce Papa to Mama's resting place. Emma nodded solemnly, dressed in her best dress and carrying a folder of drawings she'd made specifically for this visit. "I want Mama to see that you take good care of me, and that we're happy together, like she hoped we would be." The drive, too. Millbrook took them through rolling countryside painted in autumn colors, past farms where hay bales dotted golden fields and cattle grazed in peaceful contentment. Emma sat quietly for most of the journey, occasionally asking questions about the places they passed, or sharing memories of trips she'd taken with Grace. Millbrook Cemetery occupied a gentle hillside overlooking the town, its older sections marked by weathered headstones dating back over a century. Grace's grave was in the newer section, marked by a simple granite headstone that read, "Grace Marie Sullivan, beloved mother and teacher, 1987-2024. Emma stood silently for a long moment, studying the headstone with the same careful attention she brought to everything important. Ray waited beside her, his own throat tight with emotions he'd been suppressing since learning of Grace's death. "It's smaller than I thought it would be," Emma said finally. "But it's pretty here. Mama would like all these trees." She opened her folder and carefully arranged her drawings on the grass in front of the headstone. Pictures of her new room, of Ray teaching her to cook, of their house with both of them smiling in the front yard, of the three of them together with Grace watching. From the clouds above, "Hi, Mama," Emma said in a conversational tone that suggested she was simply catching up with someone who'd been away for a while. "I brought Papa to meet you. He's even better than you told me he would be." Ray knelt beside Emma, placing the yellow roses they'd brought at the base of the headstone. His voice was rough when he finally found the courage to speak. "Hello, Grace," he said quietly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you again. I'm sorry for all the years we lost, and I'm sorry you had to carry so much alone." Emma reached for his hand, offering comfort with the instinctive generosity children showed to adults in pain. "But I want you to know that Emma is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me," Ray continued, his voice growing stronger. "She's smart and brave and kind, just like you were. I promise you that I'll love her and protect her and help her become everything she's capable of being." Emma squeezed his hand, then surprised him by speaking directly to the headstone as if Grace were sitting right there with them. "Mama, Papa read me all your letters and looked at all your pictures. He knows about the engagement ring and the wedding dress, and he says you never stopped loving each other even when you couldn't be together. He's going to teach me everything about being brave and good, and I'm going to teach him about being happy." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the autumn breeze rustling through the oak trees that surrounded the cemetery. Ray found himself finally able to grieve properly for Grace, not just for her death, but for all the years they'd lost, all the conversations they'd never had, all the moments they should have shared as a family. "Papa," Emma said eventually, "I think Mama knows we're okay now. I think she's not worried about us anymore." Ray looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who'd inherited Grace's wisdom along with her eyes, and realized Emma was right. The sense of urgent responsibility that had driven his every decision since finding Emma outside Murphy's saloon had transformed into something steadier and more sustainable. They were okay. More than okay. They were a family shaped by loss but defined by love, carrying Grace's memory forward while building new traditions and experiences that were entirely their own. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Emma carefully gathered her drawings and turned back to Grace's headstone one more time. "Bye, Mama. We'll come visit again soon, and I'll bring you new pictures of all the things we're learning together. The drive back to Cedar Falls felt different than the morning journey. Emma chattered about the things she wanted to show Grace. On their next visit, the stories she wanted to tell, the ways their family continued to grow and change. Ray listened with growing certainty that they'd turned a corner in their grief and healing. That evening, as Ray tucked Emma into bed beneath the star and moon sheets that had been one of their first purchases together, she looked up at him with the trusting expression he'd come to treasure. "Papa, I think today was the day Mama stopped worrying about us and started just being proud instead." Ray's throat tightened with love and loss and hope all tangled together. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" "Because when we were at her grave, I felt like she was smiling. Not sad smiling like when people miss each other, but happy smiling like when people know everything worked out the way it was supposed to." Ray pressed a gentle kiss to Emma's forehead, marveling at the depth of insight contained in his 7-year-old daughter. "I think you're right, sweetheart. I think Mama is very proud of both of us." As he turned off Emma's light and closed her bedroom door, Ray reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace. Grace's love had orchestrated their reunion, but their own growing love for each other had created something new and lasting, a family bound not just by blood and legal documents, but by choice, commitment, and the daily decisions to care for each other's welfare and happiness. Tomorrow would bring the final legal proceedings that would make Emma officially his daughter in the eyes of the law. But tonight, Ray understood that the most important transformation had already occurred. They weren't just sharing a house or going through the motions of family life. They were genuinely, completely, irrevocably family. Grace's wedding dress, hanging in Emma's closet, and her engagement ring waiting in Ray's dresser drawer were symbols of dreams deferred but not destroyed. Someday, when Emma was old enough to understand the full story of her parents' love, those symbols would become part of her own understanding of what it meant to love someone completely, even across time and distance, and the mistakes that complicated all human relationships. For now, it was enough that a stubborn little girl had refused to go home until she found the father her mother had promised would come for them someday. Emma had been right that first morning outside Murphy's saloon. It had been the day their real life together began, the day Grace's 20-year plan finally came to fruition, the day a lonely sheriff discovered that the most important case of his career had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with learning how to love without reservation. As Ray settled into his own bed, he could hear Emma talking softly to herself in her room, a habit she'd developed of sharing her thoughts with Grace before falling asleep. Tonight, her whispered conversation seemed particularly animated, as if she had especially good news to report. Ray smiled as he listened to his daughter's voice, carrying through the thin walls of their modest house. Tomorrow's adoption hearing would make their relationship official, but the real adoption had happened weeks ago, the moment they'd chosen each other, the moment they'd decided to build a family from hope, trust, and the enduring power of Grace's love. The little girl who'd refused to go home had found her way to exactly where she belonged, and in doing so, she'd given her father the greatest gift he'd never known he needed, a future filled with purpose, joy, and the daily miracle of loving someone more than his own life. Grace's plan was complete. Now it was time for Ray and Emma to write the next chapter of their story together. December arrived in Cedar Falls with the kind of crisp, clear weather that made everything look like a Christmas card. Emma had been counting days on the calendar with the excited anticipation of a child approaching her birthday. But the event she was waiting for was far more significant than any party, the adoption hearing that would legally make Ray her father forever. "Only 3 more days, Papa," Emma announced over breakfast, consulting the calendar where she'd marked each passing day with careful X's. 3 more days until I'm really, truly, officially your daughter." Ray smiled at her enthusiasm, though his own emotions about the upcoming hearing were more complex. The legal formalities felt both monumentally important and oddly anticlimactic. Emma had been his daughter in every way that mattered since the moment she'd looked at him with Grace's eyes and told him her mother had said he'd come for them. "Someday. You've been my daughter since the day we met, sweetheart," Ray reminded her. "The judge is just going to make it official, so everyone knows it." Emma nodded seriously, then pulled out a piece of paper she'd been working on for weeks. "I wrote a speech for the judge," she announced. "Do you want to hear it?" Ray set down his coffee cup and gave Emma his full attention. "I'd love to hear it." Emma cleared her throat and began to read in the careful, precise voice she used for formal occasions. "Dear Judge, my name is Emma Grace Sullivan, but after Tuesday I want to be Emma Grace Delaney. My mama died 4 months ago, and she told me to find Sheriff Ray Delaney because he was my papa, and he would take good care of me. She was right. Papa makes me feel safe and loved every single day. He helps me with my homework and teaches me about being brave and good. He reads me stories every night and makes sure I eat vegetables even though I don't really like them because he says they'll help me grow strong. But mostly, Papa makes me feel like I belong somewhere again. When Mama died, I felt like I was floating in space with nowhere to land. Papa caught me and gave me a home where I know I'm wanted. I love him very much, and I want to be his daughter forever and always. Thank you for listening. Love, Emma." Who will be Emma Delaney soon. Ray's throat tightened with emotion as Emma finished reading. Her words captured everything he felt about their relationship, but could never express as eloquently as his 7-year-old daughter had just done. "That's perfect, sweetheart," Ray managed. "The judge is going to love hearing from you." The truth was, Ray felt more nervous about the adoption hearing than he'd anticipated. Margaret Foster had assured him that it was purely a formality. All the legal requirements had been met, social services had given their full approval, and there were no complications that might prevent the adoption from proceeding smoothly. But Ray couldn't shake the superstitious fear that something might go wrong at the last minute, that some bureaucratic oversight or unexpected objection might threaten the family he and Emma had built together. Doc Henderson seemed to sense Ray's anxiety when he stopped by the sheriff's office that afternoon. "You're wound tighter than a $2 watch," Doc observed, settling into the chair across from Ray's desk. "The hearing's going to go fine, Ray. You've got more documentation, character witnesses, and community support than most adoptions see in a year." "I know," Ray admitted. "Logically, I know everything's going to be fine, but Emma's been through so much loss already. What if something goes wrong? What if nothing goes wrong, and Tuesday afternoon you walk out of that courthouse as Emma's legal father?" Doc interrupted gently. "What if you stop borrowing trouble and start enjoying the fact that you're about to get everything you never knew you wanted?" Ray appreciated Doc's practical wisdom, but couldn't entirely dismiss his concerns. Emma had become the center of his world so completely that the thought of losing her felt like contemplating the end of everything meaningful in his life. That evening, Deputy Martinez stopped by with dinner and moral support, bringing homemade enchiladas that Emma declared even better than Papa's cooking, much to Ray's mock offense. "You know what I think?" Sophia said, as they sat around Ray's kitchen table, watching Emma carefully separate the cheese from the sauce in her enchilada. "I think you're scared of being too happy. You've been alone so long that having Emma feels too good to be true." Emma looked up from her food. "Papa's not too happy," she said matter-of-factly. "He's exactly the right amount of happy. Mama said some people are afraid of being happy because they think it means something bad will happen, but happy doesn't cause bad things. Bad things just sometimes happen to happy people too." Once again, Emma had distilled complex adult emotions into simple truth that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Ray realized she was right. He was afraid of being too happy. Afraid that his joy in their relationship might somehow tempt fate to intervene. "Your mama was very wise," Sophia said to Emma, "and you're getting to be pretty wise yourself." The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Emma insisted, on laying out her best dress for the hearing, treating the occasion with the seriousness it deserved. Ray found himself checking and rechecking the legal documents Margaret Foster had given him, as if studying them repeatedly might prevent any last-minute complications. Sunday evening brought unexpected visitors in the form of several families from Cedar Falls who wanted to show their support before the adoption hearing. The Henderson family came with a homemade cake decorated with "Welcome to the Family, Emma Delaney" in careful frosting script. Maria and her family brought flowers and hugs and the kind of warm celebration that characterized the Latino community's approach to important family milestones. Even Murphy, the elderly owner of Murphy's Saloon, stopped by with a small wrapped gift for Emma. "Figured since you started your Cedar Falls story outside my establishment, you might want a little memento," he said gruffly, handing Emma a small wooden replica of the saloon with Emma's beginning carved into the base. Emma accepted each gift and gestured with the gracious appreciation of someone who understood how rare and precious such community support could be. Ray watched his daughter navigate the attention with growing pride in her social skills and emotional intelligence. As their impromptu celebration wound down and their neighbors departed with promises to be thinking of them during Tuesday's hearing, Emma helped Ray clean up the kitchen with her usual thoroughness. "Papa," she said as she carefully dried the glasses from dinner, "are you still worried about Tuesday?" Ray considered lying, offering false reassurance that might make Emma feel better. But their relationship had been built on honesty from the beginning, and he didn't want to change that now. "A little," Ray admitted, "not because I think anything will go wrong, but because I love you so much that the thought of anything separating us scares me." Emma set down the glass she'd been drying and walked over to Ray, wrapping her arms around his waist in the fierce hug she'd perfected over their months together. "Nothing's going to separate us, Papa," she said, with the absolute conviction that children sometimes possessed about things adults found uncertain. "Mama sent me to you, and the judge is going to make it official, and then we'll be a forever family that nobody can change." Ray held his daughter close, drawing strength from her confidence and the simple truth of her words. Emma had already survived the loss of her mother, the uncertainty of placement, the challenges of adapting to a new life with a father she'd never met. Her resilience and optimism in the face of such overwhelming changes was a constant source of amazement to him. As he tucked Emma into bed that night, she pulled out the folder where she kept all her important papers: her birth certificate, the letters from Grace, the photographs of her mother, and now her speech for the judge. "Tomorrow night, I'll have adoption papers too," she said with satisfaction. "Then my folder will have everything that proves I belong with you." Ray kissed her forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her freshly washed hair and the indefinable smell that was uniquely Emma. "You don't need papers to prove you belong with me, sweetheart," he said gently. "You belong with me because we love each other and we choose to be family." Emma smiled sleepily. "I know, Papa, but it'll be nice to have the papers too, just in case anyone ever wonders." As Ray settled into his own bed that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 months ago, he'd been a solitary man with a routine life and no concept of the joy that was possible when you loved someone more than yourself. Now he was hours away from legally claiming the daughter who'd transformed his understanding of purpose, happiness, and what it meant to have something worth protecting. Grace's engagement ring sat in his dresser drawer, waiting for the day when Emma would be old enough to understand its full significance. Grace's wedding dress hung in Emma's closet, preserved for a future that would honor the past while creating something entirely new. Tomorrow would bring the final legal step in Emma's journey from Grace's daughter to their daughter, from a lost child to a found family member, from Emma Sullivan to Emma Delaney. Ray had spent his entire career understanding that justice was about making things right, about ensuring that people got what they deserved under the law. Tomorrow, he would experience a different kind of justice, the cosmic rightness of a love that had survived separation, death, and 20 years of silence to bring a father and daughter together exactly when they needed each other most. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting intricate patterns on the courthouse windows, and Emma's breath making small clouds as she practiced her speech one final time on the front porch. "I'm ready, Papa," she announced, smoothing down her best dress and adjusting the small silver bracelet that had been her mother's. "Are you ready?" Ray straightened his tie and checked his watch, marveling at how his 7-year-old daughter appeared calmer about the proceedings than he. "Well, as ready as I'll ever be, sweetheart." The courthouse in Cedar Falls had witnessed decades of legal proceedings, but few cases had generated as much community interest as Ray and Emma's adoption hearing. Despite the cold morning air, a small crowd of supporters had gathered on the courthouse steps. Doc Henderson, Deputy Martinez and her family, Mrs. Henderson from the general store, Murphy from the saloon, and several other families who'd watched Ray and Emma build their life together over the past 5 months. "Look at all the people who came to support us," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with wonder as they approached the courthouse. "They came because they love you," Ray replied, "and because they want to celebrate our family becoming official." Margaret Foster met them at the courthouse entrance, carrying a briefcase thick with documentation and wearing the confident expression of an attorney who'd prepared thoroughly for an important case. "Everything looks perfect," she assured Ray as they climbed the steps together. "Judge Morrison has reviewed all the documentation, and this should be a very straightforward proceeding." The courtroom was smaller than Ray had expected, with wooden benches that had been polished smooth by decades of use and tall windows that let in streams of winter sunlight. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair, presided from behind an imposing oak desk that somehow managed to seem welcoming rather than intimidating. "Good morning," Judge Morrison said as they took their seats. "I understand we're here today to make a family official. I've reviewed all the documentation in this case, and I must say it's one of the most thoroughly prepared adoption petitions I've seen in my 20 years on the bench." Ray felt some of his nervousness ease at the judge's warm tone. Emma sat beside him, her small hands folded in her lap, her expression serious but not afraid. "Sheriff Delaney," Judge Morrison continued, "I've read the character references submitted on your behalf, including statements from Dr. Henderson, your deputy, members of your community, and Emma's former social worker. Would you like to make a statement about your desire to adopt Emma?" Ray stood, his prepared remarks suddenly feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what this moment represented. "Your Honor, 5 months ago, I didn't know Emma existed. Her mother, Grace Sullivan, was someone I'd loved and lost 20 years ago. Due to my own mistakes and pride, when Emma appeared in my life, she brought with her not just the chance to be her father, but the opportunity to become the man Grace had always believed I could be." Ray's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Emma has taught me that love isn't just about protecting people. It's about helping them grow, supporting their dreams, and creating a home where they feel safe to be exactly who they are. She's made me a better person, a better sheriff, and given my life a purpose I never knew I was missing." He looked down at Emma, who was watching him with the intense attention she gave to everything important. "I want to adopt Emma, not just because I love her, but because I can't imagine my life without her in it. She's my daughter in every way that matters, and I want the law to recognize what my heart has known since the day we met." Judge Morrison made notes on her papers, then turned her attention to Emma. "Emma, sweetie, I understand you have something you'd like to say?" Emma stood carefully, unfolding her prepared speech with the deliberate movements of someone who'd practiced this moment many times. She read her words clearly and confidently, her young voice carrying easily through the quiet courtroom. When she finished, Judge Morrison smiled with genuine warmth. "That was beautifully said, Emma. Can you tell me in your own words how you feel about Sheriff Delaney adopting you?" Emma folded her speech neatly and looked directly at the judge. Papa makes me feel like the most important person in the world, she said simply. When I was scared and sad after Mama died, he helped me learn how to be happy again. He reads me stories and helps with my homework and teaches me about being brave. But mostly, he loves me like papas are supposed to love their daughters. She paused, then added with the directness that characterized all her important statements. I want to be Emma Delaney forever and always, so everyone knows I belong with Papa and he belongs with me. Judge Morrison set down her pen and leaned forward slightly. Emma, do you understand that adoption means Sheriff Delaney will be your legal father, with all the responsibilities that comes with, that he'll make decisions about your education, your health care, where you live and how you're raised? Emma nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am, that's what papas do. They take care of their children and help them learn how to be good people. And Sheriff Delaney, Judge Morrison continued, do you understand that adopting Emma means you're accepting complete legal and financial responsibility for her welfare until she reaches adulthood, and that you're making a permanent commitment to be her father? Yes, Your Honor, Ray replied without hesitation. It's the most important commitment I'll ever make. Judge Morrison reviewed her papers one final time, then picked up her gavel with a smile that suggested she found genuine joy in this particular aspect of her judicial duties. Based on the documentation presented, the character references submitted, the social services evaluation, and the clear wishes of both parties involved, I am satisfied that this adoption serves Emma's best interests and creates a stable, loving family unit. She raised the gavel, and Ray felt his heart stop beating as they reached the moment that would change everything. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that the petition for adoption is granted. Sheriff Ray Delaney, you are now the legal father of Emma Grace Delaney, with all the rights and responsibilities that relationship entails. The gavel came down with a decisive thud that seemed to echo through the courtroom and Ray's chest simultaneously. Emma launched herself at Ray with a delighted squeal that filled the formal courtroom with pure joy. We did it, Papa. We're officially family now. Ray caught his daughter, his legal daughter, and held her tight, feeling tears of relief and happiness stream down his face without embarrassment. Around them, the small crowd of supporters burst into applause and cheers that reflected the community's investment in their success. Congratulations, Mr. Delaney, Judge Morrison said, her own eyes bright with emotion. And congratulations to you, Emma. You're a lucky little girl to have found such a devoted father. Margaret Foster appeared beside them with the official adoption decree, the legal document that would serve as permanent proof of their relationship. The paper was formal and official, covered with legal language and judicial seals. But to Ray, it represented the most important achievement of his life. How does it feel to be Emma Delaney? Doc Henderson asked, as their supporters surrounded them with congratulations and hugs. Emma considered the question with typical seriousness. It feels like coming home, she said finally. It feels like everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be now. Ray looked around the courthouse, at the friends who'd supported them through this process, at the legal documents that made their family official, at the daughter who'd transformed his understanding of love and purpose, and realized Emma was absolutely right. Everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. They walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, Sheriff Ray Delaney and his daughter Emma, carrying with them the official papers that proved what their hearts had known for months. They were family, forever and always, bound by love and law and the unbreakable bonds that formed when two people chose to belong to each other completely. The little girl who'd refused to go home had finally, officially, arrived exactly where she was meant to be. 6 months after the adoption hearing, as spring painted Cedar Falls in shades of green and gold, Sheriff Ray Delaney stood in his backyard, watching his daughter Emma teach Deputy Martinez's youngest son how to properly dust for fingerprints, using the technique Ray had shown her on that first uncertain morning when they were still learning to be family. You have to be very gentle, Miguel. Emma explained with the patient authority of someone who'd mastered a skill through careful practice. Papa says the most important clues are usually the ones you have to look hardest to find. At 8 years old now, Emma had grown taller and more confident, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight in ways that reminded Ray daily of Grace's beauty. But it was Emma's emerging personality, her curiosity, her kindness, her remarkable ability to find joy in simple moments that truly honored her mother's memory while creating something entirely new. Ray's house bore little resemblance to the sparse bachelor quarters Emma had first encountered. The walls displayed an ever-growing collection of Emma's artwork, alongside family photographs that documented their life together. The refrigerator served as a gallery for her school papers, permission slips, and the kind of everyday memorabilia that accumulated when a child was genuinely cherished and celebrated. Emma's room had evolved from the simply furnished space Maria's family had helped create into a true sanctuary filled with books, art supplies, the dollhouse Doc Henderson had crafted for her birthday, and Grace's wedding dress hanging carefully in the closet like a promise of future possibilities. The kitchen table, where they'd once sat awkwardly trying to learn each other's preferences, now hosted everything from homework sessions to cookie-baking adventures to the elaborate art projects Emma undertook with the focused intensity she'd inherited from both parents. "Papa, look what Miguel made!" Emma called, running over with a fingerprint card that showed Miguel's small handprints in cocoa powder. "He's going to be a detective like us when he grows up." Ray accepted the card with appropriate gravity, knowing that Emma's enthusiastic inclusion of him in her future plans was one of the countless gifts she brought to his daily life. To Emma, it was perfectly natural that she would follow in her father's professional footsteps, that their shared interest in investigation and justice would extend into her adult years. "That's excellent work, Miguel," Ray said to the boy, who beamed with pride at the sheriff's approval. "Emma's a very good teacher." The lazy Saturday afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret Foster, making one of her regular visits to check on Emma's adjustment and handle the ongoing legal details that accompanied adoption cases. Over the months, these visits had evolved from formal evaluations into genuine friendship calls, with Margaret serving as both Emma's advocate and the keeper of Grace's memory. "Emma, I have something special for you today," Margaret said, settling into the patio chair Ray offered her. "It's from your mother's safe deposit box, something she wanted you to have when you turned 8. Emma's eyes widened with anticipation as Margaret produced a small, wrapped package, along with an envelope bearing Grace's handwriting. "She left specific instructions about when to give this to you," Margaret explained. "She said 8 years old was when you'd be mature enough to understand its significance." Emma opened the package carefully, revealing a delicate gold locket on a chain that had obviously been chosen with great care. Inside the locket were 2 tiny photographs, Grace on one side, Ray on the other, both pictures taken during their original courtship 20 years ago. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, examining the locket with reverent fingers. "Mama and Papa together." Ray's throat tightened as he recognized the photographs. Grace had taken his picture during a picnic they'd shared in the early days of their relationship, when the future had seemed unlimited and their love had felt strong enough to overcome any obstacle. He'd taken Grace's photograph that same day, capturing her laughing at something he'd said, her face radiant with happiness and hope. Emma opened the accompanying letter and read Grace's final message to her daughter. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you've been living with your papa for a while now, and I hope you understand how much he loves you. I'm giving you this locket on your 8th birthday because that's when I think you're old enough to carry both your parents with you wherever you go. The pictures in this locket show Papa and me when we were young and thought we had all the time in the world. We were wrong about having time, but we were right about love. The love that created you was the strongest, truest thing either of us ever experienced. And even though we lost our way for 20 years, that love brought you to him when you needed each other most. Wear this locket and remember that you carry the best parts of both of us. You have Papa's sense of justice and my stubborn determination. You have his kindness and my curiosity about the world. Most importantly, you have both of our capacity to love deeply and completely. Someday, you'll understand that the greatest gift parents can give their children isn't perfection. It's the knowledge that they're cherished beyond measure, that they have people who will always believe in them and support their dreams. You are so deeply loved, Emma. By me, by your papa, and by all the people in Cedar Falls who've welcomed you into their community family. Never forget that. Especially during the times when growing up feels difficult or confusing. Be brave, be kind, and be happy. Those are the three things that matter most. All my love, always, Mama. Emma looked up from the letter with tears in her eyes, but a smile on her face. She knew we'd be happy together, didn't she, Papa? She knew I'd love you from the moment I met you, Ray replied, helping Emma fasten the locket around her neck. Just like she knew you'd love me back, even though I had no idea how to be a papa at first. Emma touched the locket with gentle fingers, and Ray could see Grace's wisdom in choosing this particular gift for this particular moment. 8 years old was indeed the right age for Emma to carry physical reminders of both parents, to understand that she was the living bridge between past and future, loss and hope. As the afternoon faded toward evening, their small gathering moved indoors for the kind of impromptu dinner that had become common in the Delaney household. Emma insisted on cooking. She'd become an accomplished assistant chef under Ray's patient tutelage, while Miguel helped set the table and Margaret shared updates about other families she worked with. You know, Margaret said as they sat around the kitchen table sharing homemade spaghetti and garlic bread, Grace would be amazed by the life you've built here. This house feels like the home she always dreamed of creating. Ray looked around the table at Emma, explaining the finer points of proper spaghetti twirling to Miguel, at Margaret laughing at something his daughter had said, at the comfortable chaos of family dinner, and realized Margaret was right. This was the home Grace had envisioned when she'd made her plans 20 years ago. Not perfect, but filled with love, laughter, and the daily evidence that people cared about each other's welfare and happiness. After their guests departed and Emma was settled in bed with a new library book and her mother's locket gleaming against her nightgown, Ray found himself in his living room looking at the family photograph they'd taken on Emma's 8th birthday. In the picture, Emma sat between Ray and Doc Henderson, surrounded by the extended family of choice they'd built in Cedar Falls. Her smile was radiant, her eyes bright with the confidence of a child who knew she was cherished and secure. Ray's own expression showed the deep contentment he'd found in fatherhood, the sense of completion he'd gained from finally understanding his true purpose in life. On his mantel, beside the birthday photograph, sat the formal adoption decree in its place of honor, along with the first photograph he and Emma had taken together and the latest school picture that showed Emma growing into the remarkable young woman she was becoming. In his dresser drawer, Grace's engagement ring waited for the future, and in Emma's closet, Grace's wedding dress preserved dreams and possibilities that might someday be realized in new and different ways. But it was the everyday artifacts of their current life that truly told their story. Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator, her school books scattered across the coffee table, her jacket hanging on the peg by the front door next to Ray's sheriff's hat. These were the signs of a family living fully in the present, while honoring the past and building toward a future filled with promise. As Ray turned off the lights and headed toward his bedroom, he could hear Emma talking softly to herself. Her nightly conversation with Grace that had evolved from grief into gratitude, from desperate missing into peaceful connection. "Mama, today was really good," Emma whispered. "Papa taught Miguel about fingerprints, and Mrs. Foster brought me your locket, and we had spaghetti for dinner. I think you'd be proud of how good Papa's gotten at making sure I eat my vegetables." Ray smiled as he listened to his daughter's gentle monologue, understanding that these conversations weren't about inability to let go. They were about maintaining healthy connections to love that transcended physical presence. "I wore your locket all afternoon, and it made me feel like you were right here with us," Emma continued. "I think Papa likes knowing you're watching over our family too. He talks to your picture sometimes when he thinks I'm not listening." The observation was accurate. Ray had indeed developed the habit of sharing daily updates with Grace's photograph, telling her about Emma's achievements, challenges, and the countless small moments that defined their life together. "Tomorrow Papa's going to teach me how to change a tire," Emma whispered. "He says it's important for girls to know how to take care of themselves. I think you'd agree with that. You always said girls could do anything boys could do. Just maybe in prettier shoes." Ray's chest filled with warmth as he heard Emma echo one of Grace's favorite sayings. Their daughter carried forward her mother's wisdom while adding her own unique perspective to the world. "Good night, Mama," Emma concluded. "I love you and I love Papa, and I'm really glad you sent me to find him. We're exactly the family you hoped we'd be." As Emma's whispered conversation ended and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Ray reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of complete contentment. A year ago, he'd been a solitary man, convinced that his life was complete and satisfying. Now he understood that contentment and true happiness were entirely different experiences. Contentment was about being satisfied with what you had. Happiness was about loving what you had so much that you couldn't imagine wanting anything else. The little girl, who'd refused to go home until she found her papa, had given him the greatest gift anyone had ever received: the chance to love someone. More than his own life, to be needed and cherished, to wake up every morning with clear purpose and deep gratitude. Emma Grace Delaney, formerly Sullivan, sleeping peacefully in her star and moon sheets with her mother's locket around her neck and her father's unconditional love surrounding her like armor, represented everything good that could emerge from loss, hope, and the enduring power of love to create families from the most impossible circumstances. Ray fell asleep that night, as he did every night now, not as a solitary sheriff marking time until retirement, but as a father counting his blessings and already looking forward to tomorrow's opportunity to watch his remarkable daughter continue growing into the extraordinary woman Grace had always known she could become. The story that had begun with a stubborn little girl sitting outside Murphy's saloon had become the greatest love story Ray would ever be part of. Not romantic love this time, but the even more powerful love between a parent and child. Love that transformed everyone it touched and created hope where none had existed before. Sometimes the most important cases weren't about solving crimes or dispensing justice under the law. Sometimes they were about opening your heart to possibilities you'd never considered and discovering that the life you'd never imagined wanting was exactly the life you'd been meant to live all along.